Sometimes I can hear the sound trying to make sense in my brain.
Truth Lies in Alzheimer's with Lisa Skinner is a podcast that is airing on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC.
Is what I need to change the world. A few bunch of
How's everybody doing today? Welcome to our show, Truth, Lies, and Alzheimer's, the podcast. I'm Lisa Skinner, your host. Let's go ahead and start this conversation.
silent fear. Sometimes I can hear the sound trying to make sense in my brain. Smooth melody comes to life after the
Cope, don't struggle. Navigate the challenges of Alzheimer's.
small piece of paper and love is what I need to change the world. A few bunch of words in this song written for me and for you. All the things we can do for the sake of the nature we love.
Our goal is to get to the truth, dispel the lies and myths, and unveil its secret faces. Understand what it's truly like to live with this disease and focus on what really matters, spending quality time with your loved one.
We can do this. Push all the darkness away.
Hi, Lisa Skinner here to share another tip video with you today. This one's about raising the caregiver bar to create moments of joy and a meaningful life. It won't be enough to offer exceptional care to a loved one suffering with dementia. It will also be vital to offer what we call person-centered care. If you've met one person with dementia, guess what? You've met one person with dementia, because every individual has a unique history and personality, which shapes the way they are affected by this disease. Seeing the person as an individual with unique qualities allows us to carefully shape and match our care efforts to meet an individual person's needs. 3 keys to offering person-centered care is, number 1, obtain and maintain a thorough knowledge of the individual person. Number 2, observe the person's behaviors and the way they respond to things. And number 3, listen and communicate with the person in order to individualize care according to their needs. Typically, people suffering with dementia are at different ability stages of the disease. They will either be experiencing moderate memory loss and frustration, a realization of their cognitive loss, or an awareness of them needing help. Or they're experiencing severe memory loss, where new material is lost quickly to them and they are disoriented and only simple chores are preserved in their brains. Lastly, they are now frail and dependent on others for everything and cannot recall any abilities, have almost no attention span, and require a lot of nurturing and support. So initiate familiar activities for the person, and here's your 12-step plan. Take them for a walk, lead them in chair exercises, offer sensory stimulating activities that cater to the 5 senses, one-on-one interaction, like looking through personal photo albums, singing to familiar music, very powerful, daily living skills, chores that are reminiscent of things they did when they were younger, dancing, folding towels, sorting items like coins, pet therapy, baking or cooking, or talking about current events. Well, thanks for joining me here again today. I hope you find this information helpful through your journey with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. I'll see you next time. I'm Lisa Skinner, and I am with you on this journey. Truth Lies in Alzheimer's, Its Secret Faces by authors Lisa Skinner And Douglas W. Collins is a concise guide for caregivers navigating the heartbreaking challenges of having a loved one diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and other dementia. Everyone has an Alzheimer's story. It's time to start that conversation about Alzheimer's disease and stop treating it like it's only family business. You can find it on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and other fine booksellers.
Paper and love is what I need.
Here at Truth, Lies, and Alzheimer's, the podcast, we say that everyone has an Alzheimer's story. And here today is my very special guest, Marianne Sciucco, to share hers. Welcome to the show, Marianne. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us today. Marianne is a registered nurse, author, and founder manager at allsauthors.com, dedicated to ending the silence and stigma of dementia one book at a time. She is also the podcast producer and host of the show, Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia. As a registered nurse, she cared for hundreds of dementia patients over a 20-year career. Then the disease hit home when her stepfather was diagnosed with mixed dementia, including frontotemporal lobe, vascular, and Alzheimer's disease. So Marianne, share with us the inspiration behind the creation of allsauthors.com and what its mission is.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. Our mission is to provide caregivers with quality, vetted resources to help them on their dementia journey. All of us have been caregivers at some point in our life, and we all chose to write books and to blog and to make our stories public because we wanted to help others. We had learned a lot, and we felt that it was important to share what we learned because we knew that so many people on this journey are kind of flying blind and starving for information. And we had it. And this is really hard-earned information. It's a very hard education on the job. So we had each written a book. There were three of us. We did not know each other. We met online. We met on Twitter, actually, and kind of, acquainted with one another. I decided one June that I wanted to do a cross promotion with other authors and invited them to join me. And they agreed, and we decided to do a 1-month promotion for Alzheimer's and dementia awareness and for our books. And that was it. But what we discovered is that we really liked each other, and we wanted to keep going. So that was back in 2015. And here we are now, it's 2022. And there are over 300 authors in our organization and more than that many books, blogs, podcasts, films. We have a lot of resources on our website. And all of our resources have been carefully vetted by a member of our management team who is not only an author, but has been a caregiver for a loved one with dementia.
Well, I can honestly attest that it is a wonderful resource for people, and pretty much everything any caregiver or family member would want to find about the management of Alzheimer's disease is on your website. So definitely a good resource, and appreciate you providing that for everybody because it is such a difficult situation. I've been involved in this industry for 50 years. 30 as a professional behavior specialist, but 20 years before that was my first experience with a family member when my grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And since then, I have actually had 8 family members suffer from a form of dementia. I am well aware of the limited resources that are available for hands-on caregivers, for family members. So this is what we're all trying to change, because the numbers that we are seeing of the projected amount of people that will be developing this disease by the year 2050 are staggering. They're going to triple from the numbers we're seeing today. And I don't think as a society, we are prepared at all. So thank you for the great work that you all are doing. And one of the things that I think would be a really valuable discussion for us to have today is to talk about some of the issues that caregivers face. And it's not just the hands-on caregivers, the boots on the ground caregivers, but also the family members, the friends, the relatives, because it has such a dramatic impact on everybody involved. So what I'd like to do, I want to read a couple of little quotes and stories that were sent in from actual family caregivers. So I'll read them one by one, and then let's open up a discussion about kind of your perspective of what they're saying and your experience, that if you've seen the same type of feelings from family members and caregivers. So the first one, she says, caregivers go through more than they will tell you. They give up a lot and rarely have a social life. They can get sick and emotionally worn out. It's a lot for one person, and you will never know until you have walked the road of a caregiver. So what would your response to that sentiment be?
Well, all of that is very true. Part of the problem with it is that many people fall into caregiving gradually, where they may be picking up more and more responsibilities for their loved one, not realizing that it's piling on. And before they know it, they're either a full-time caregiver, or they could be a live-in caregiver, or have their loved one living with them. But before they know it, they have assumed all of the responsibility for this person's life. And it is overwhelming. And people may also be working. They may have children that they're raising. They could have grandchildren. They may be married. They have their own financial responsibilities and their own social life. And what happens is you tend to push that kind of stuff aside because you feel that you must do this task for your mom or your husband or whoever it is that you're caring for. So a big part of the problem is before people even realize that they're sliding into this role, they're in the role. And on the other side, people are not prepared to take that role because nobody ever says, gee, I hope, when I get older, I hope that I can become a caregiver for somebody with dementia. Nobody ever plans for that.
Oh, that's true.
So they don't have the knowledge that they need. They don't know what resources they need. Are they available in their community? I mean, there's a million things that you have to think about. Yeah, most people are just totally unprepared, and it can happen quickly. Like all of a sudden, one day you get a diagnosis, but really, what's been going on in most cases is you've been sliding into this role for a little while, and then all of a sudden, it's consuming.
Yeah. Another woman wrote in and said, I feel like I have no one. Our friends scattered when things started getting strange with my loved one. He has no family except me, and my only sister lives thousands of miles away. It is so very lonely and hard to cope. I feel like I'm losing my sanity right along with him. Sad, hopeless, no future. What's your response to her feelings about her situation?
That is a very sad situation. Many families now in the United States, it's normal for children to move away from home. Many times parents will relocate, to retire. They go down to Florida or they go to Arizona and they move away from their family and find themselves in this predicament. They don't have a support system. But people need to realize now they've entered into a different world, and there is help and support in that world. But you have to look for it. You have to ask for it. It doesn't knock on your door. So you may not receive support from your friends and relatives because they don't understand what you're going through. It hasn't happened to them.
No.
They are afraid that it could be contagious. Remember, there's a lot of stigma attached to a dementia diagnosis. There's
absolutely.
A lot of fear. People don't want to see that. It's like mental illness, and people prefer to move away from that as opposed to
Yes.
get close to it. I always say that you do things for others, not looking for a reward. You do it because you want to do it. And if you're looking for rewards and applause and things, you're on the wrong track. So when you are in a situation like dementia caregiving and looking around for support, you need to look in other places. And you can find that a lot of it is in your community. You may know people on a dementia journey, but nobody's talking about it. So if you mention to somebody in church or a coworker or somebody that you see maybe regularly, a neighbor, my husband has dementia and it's really hard. They might say back to you, oh, I know what that's like. My mom had it. Or, oh, my sister's going through that with her husband. So many people. This is like an epidemic. So you need to open up. And you need to be willing to, go online, look for resources. That's where a lot of these resources exist, especially since the pandemic, because people can't get out. A lot of caregivers, you can't get out. Even if you want to go to that 1 hour support group, you can't because it's, 35 minutes traveling one way. It's now doubled its time. You can't be away from home. So the internet is a really great place to find support.
One of the things that I think I have learned in the almost 30 years that I've been counseling families and working with families and working with the actual people suffering from dementia is I think the key starts with, to unlock the door to the mystery of all this, is with understanding what this disease is doing to their loved one. It's got to start there because there's so many things that are so counterintuitive to the way we think they are. And most people, as you know, Marianne, associate Alzheimer's disease strictly with memory loss and confusion. But it is so much more complicated than that. And a lot of people aren't aware and don't understand that a lot of these signs and symptoms and behaviors that we see that accompany the disease are part of the disease. They're the people's way of trying to tell us something. So in my experience, that's where I start with people, is helping them understand what is happening to their loved one, what to expect, and how to be prepared for just about any situation.
Exactly. This is a brain disease. And the brain is the most complex organism in the universe, I've heard. So we don't know a lot about the brain, even scientists. So the average person, forget it. They know very little about the brain. So it's important to start there and to understand that your loved one, they're not trying to be difficult. They cannot control what is going on. In my own personal dementia story with my stepfather, he was a man who already had brain injury at birth. He was a premature baby and he suffered some brain injury that gave him some minor deficits he was able to overcome. But he was always difficult. And as he was getting older, he was becoming more difficult, but we just thought he was being a jerk and let a lot of things slide for a while until it just became so outrageous. We knew that there was something really wrong. So when we finally brought him to a doctor and he had the whole test that they do for dementia, and it took several weeks, but we finally did get a diagnosis, and that was really helpful because at least we knew what was going on, because some could be a minor thing causing people to have behavioral changes. It could be an infection, which could be cleared. So it's important to get that diagnosis.
Those are really important points and good points that you raised there, Marianne. And one of the things that makes this disease so difficult is early detection, because in the beginning stage of the disease, it is so difficult to differentiate whether somebody has just normal aging going on or maybe the beginnings of mild cognitive impairment. Most people are not even diagnosed with the Alzheimer's disease until they're well into their mid stages. So what you said about your stepfather, had some kind of bizarre behaviors that you raised your eyebrows and red flags, but there was nothing really definitive about his behavior that you could pinpoint until he was far enough along into his mixed dementia to be able to really put a name, or names in this case, to it. And I think that that's one of the things that makes it so difficult for family members. And I know that it's one of the things that has been so challenging for testing and, clinical trials and things like that, because the things that they have come up with really are more suited for early detection, but it's so inconclusive. So they pretty much, are at a catch-22, because you have to wait until they're far enough along in the disease to actually, understand that there really is something more serious going on here than just the normal aging process.
Yes. And then there's also denial. So we were in a lot of denial. Yeah, we didn't want there to be something wrong, because if there is, now we have to do something, and there is going to be change. So that is like the really hard part, is the change. And having to think ahead. Well, what are we going to do if this happens? And what will we do then? And people don't like to live that way. So we encountered that with him. We thought he was being willful, and that he was doing the annoying things he was doing because he was trying to be funny. And that went on for a really long time. And finally, we just, it became apparent that there was a lot more to this. And I brought him to the doctor, and the doctor didn't want to address it with him. So we had to find a new doctor. Oh, yeah. She said, will you help me? And I said, I will help you. But once we start, we are not turning back. I am not going to get halfway through this and then just give up, because we need to know what's going on. So she agreed to that. And the first thing we did was got another doctor. And that made all the difference.
That actually is one of the focuses of the new World Alzheimer's 2022 report that they do bring up in this 400-page report, is the lack of follow-up by the medical professionals when they do give a diagnosis. And basically, in a nutshell, what the report emphasizes is most of the medical professionals, even if they are giving a diagnosis, they're basically saying, okay, well, just now go get your life in order. And they're not giving, because they're not trained, they're not knowledgeable, they don't know what to tell people. And this is brought up to me all the time. And I personally am well aware that this is still the case today. So I was at least a little bit relieved to hear that this is really a major focus now worldwide for managing this disease moving forward.
Right. Most people get a diagnosis and that's it. They're dismissed because there is nothing to be done. You're not going to go to surgery. There's no chemotherapy. There's no physical rehabilitative therapy or cognitive therapies. So you're pretty much on your own. I mean, the least they could receive is a pamphlet to the local Alzheimer's Association or to All's Authors or to some support group or the Office for the Aging or something in the community where they know they can get help. But we hear this over and over and over again, how they were just dismissed.
That's what this report has basically disclosed.
Sure.
And this is a worldwide problem. This isn't just the United States or Puerto Rico or Mexico. It is a worldwide problem, but they are addressing it. But, how do you fix something like that? We are on the cusp of a major world crisis with this disease, and it's going to come upon us quickly. Mm-hmm. I wanted to read this story. This one really kind of breaks my heart, and it's not the only person that I've ever heard this feel this way about her family situation. She says, watching my beloved mother die piece by piece is so much more painful than a sudden loss. In 3 years, we have seen her decline from just repeating herself and having some mobility issues to being bedridden and totally concerned 90% of the time. She and my father live in an independent living apartment in a senior living center. We now have hospice in to help, but it's not nearly enough. What no one tells you about dementia is that it can slowly kill the entire family. My father is physically and emotionally exhausted. My sisters and I help when we can, but it's still not enough. So we feel constantly stressed, guilty, and terribly sad. And sometimes we take it out on each other. And then she concludes by saying, I wouldn't wish this on anyone. I have observed this for 30 years now. And unfortunately, it is the reality of the truth of this disease with families and caregivers. And I think really, we brought this up a couple times, but I think really where the demise is in this whole situation is people aren't prepared and they don't know what to expect and they don't know how to manage it and they don't know how to react to somebody accusing them of stealing their things. And so I think we all need to have a much better grasp and understanding on what the impact that this disease is having on everybody. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that. And it's kind of controversial in many ways, too, because I think if they are discussing Alzheimer's dementia in the mainstream, they tend to focus on the early onset where people are still full functioning and living a happy kind of life. You don't often see the people that are like in the end stage, like the one you mentioned in that little story. Unable to do anything, bedridden, for years. It goes on. They don't know who anybody is or where they are. They're not communicative, nonverbal. That is the end stage of this disease, unfortunately. It is a terminal illness. Many people don't often even understand that. There's nothing you can do about it. There is no cure. It's depressing all around. But then we run into the ethics of when we want to show the world what our loved one looks like or what we're going through visually, the person with the disease is not able to consent to that. So now are we violating their dignity and privacy by exposing them? There are people who have said to loved ones, you can share my story, please. I want people to see the realities of this. And then that's long before they're ever going to encounter those late stages, which, I saw all of that when I was in my nursing career. My first job was at a nursing home. And when I went on my job interview, I got a tour and she showed me like 3 of the 4 units. The last unit was on the 3rd floor. I said, what's up on the 3rd floor? And she said, well, that's where we have the dementia patients, but we don't go up there. It's not part of the tour. So I knew then that, right from there, stigma was attached to that. And then ironically, one night I was sent up to fill in on the 3rd floor, which everybody told me, if you go up there, you're going to have a bad night. And I loved it. And I worked up there a lot. I would be very happy and willing to go up there. I sort of liked it. So,
but yeah, I think, we're talking a lot of doom and gloom here about this disease, which a lot of people believe is the case. But what I would like people to know, and I'm sure you've had the same experience, is having an Alzheimer's diagnosis doesn't necessarily mean that, okay, this is it. This is the end of your life. I have watched people for decades live very fulfilling, meaningful lives when they're provided the right environment and they are cared for by people who understand this disease. And again, that is the key here. We just need to raise the awareness and educate people on how to go about doing that. And they can actually focus on what really matters, and that's quality time spent with their loved one while they still have time here. It doesn't have to be all doom and gloom and sadness and heartbreak. And I have personally witnessed that for decades, and I think you have too. So we know it's very possible to provide that for people living with this disease. It's just having access to the right resources.
That's right. There are many of those people in All's authors who have either written their books or have had their books
Yes.
written for them that are living amazing lives, and they have dementia.
Yes.
Tony Copeland Parker, his book, Running All Over the World, when his partner received the diagnosis, I think like at 56 years old, that she had early onset, their plan was to retire, sell their house, and travel all over the world running marathons. And they've been doing that for 7 years.
That's
And
great. Great
Peter
story.
Berry, Peter Berry in the UK, when he was diagnosed, his father had Alzheimer's and succumbed to that. And he knew what was ahead of him. He was very depressed. And then one day he realized, I'm still alive. I need to live a good life and do what I can to help other people. And his book was written, and he's cycling all over England, raising money for Alzheimer's research and having a ball as like a celebrity, for Alzheimer's advocacy. He's in the media. He's interviewed. I mean, he's doing great. So then there's only 2 examples of people living well with dementia, and they're out there. And another point, we talk about people suffering, and Kate Swaffer, one of our authors, will say, we are not suffering. Our families may be suffering, but we are not suffering. And when you think about it, in most cases, as long as their needs are being met, a lot of these, there you have dementia, but they are not suffering as much as their loved ones are.
I'm going to ask you just one last question. I like to ask all my guests the same question. Because you've been through this, you are a registered nurse, you've done this professionally, you have had a lot of experience. What is one piece of advice that you could share with any person currently going through this journey with a family member or caring for somebody with Alzheimer's disease that might really help them today, that maybe you know now that you wished you knew years ago?
Make time every day to learn something. Make it your priority in the morning to set aside maybe 10 or 15 minutes in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. And it doesn't have to be an hour, 60 minutes in a row. It can be just 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. Read something. Go online, follow blogs, follow different resources. See what's going on. Pay attention to what's happening in Alzheimer's dementia world. Watch movies, watch documentaries, listen to podcasts. You can start them and then stop them when you run out of time, and pick it back up again. Same thing with the book. You can read one page or one chapter. You don't have to sit down and read the entire book. Find a book or a resource that speaks to you and spend a little time every day. Carve it out. Put it on the schedule. Reading time. Podcast time. You can listen to a podcast while you're doing just about anything. So There's really no excuse not to listen. Yeah, you can listen while you're doing dishes, when you're driving, when you're, whatever you're doing. You're doing yard work. I listen to them all day long sometimes, especially on the weekend. I'm plugged in for like 3, 4, 5 hours. So you can definitely absorb information. So don't let that get in your way. If you don't like to read, listen, or watch something, and talk to other people. Find a group. It can be in person, it can be online, but find a group of people that you can talk to.
And again, this just goes back to what we said earlier. It's understanding the disease. And once you have your head wrapped a little bit clearer around what this disease actually does to somebody, it's going to make your world so much easier and their world so much easier. Well, thanks again for being a guest on our show, Marianne. It's been a great pleasure to have you here today, and keep up the wonderful work that you and All's authors are doing on behalf of everybody in the world who has touched Alzheimer's disease and dementia.
Thank you, Lisa. And I do want to mention that you are an All's author.
I am. Oh, that reminds me. Tell us where people can find the All's authors and your wonderful library of books that are available to people.
Okay, we are at allsauthors.com. It's ALZ authors.com. And you'll find our blog, our bookstore, our podcast, and everything is organized and categorized to make it easy for you to find out what you want.
Terrific. Well, thanks again. Best of luck to you.
All right. Thank you. And
the
you
work
too.
You're all doing. Thank you.
And you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sometimes I can hear the sound trying to make sense in my brain. Smooth melody comes to life after the rain. A small piece of paper and love is what I need to change the world. A few bunch of words in this song written for me and for you.